we're going to go over how to trace an algorithm. So our algorithm in this case is here on the left side. So we can see that we have an algorithm which says sum equals 0, then it has some loop, and then after the loop it has some if statements, and then it outputs it. So whenever we get a question like this in the IB exam, we want to do a few things. First, we want to check if they give us our trace table. If they do, then they're going to give us some headers, and that's great. If they don't give us some headers, then we're going to have to include those headers. And we have to look for a few things. We look for loop counters. In this case, that would be count. We would look for defined variables. In this case, that would be sum. And perhaps that there could be other variables in here, but there's not. We look at if statement clauses. We have n mod count equals 0 and sum equals n. And then we look for output. There's always going to be an output. So we can start writing those down in our headers as soon as we know that. So we're going to start with n because they give us n, and that's one of the defined variables. So we'll have that as our header. We'll also have sum because that is the first defined variable that we can see. We have count, which is a loop counter. We have an if statement clause. So we finish our loop counters, we finish our defined variables, we have our if statement clause, in this case, n mod count equals 0, which would be this whole part. We also have another if statement clause, which is sum equals n, and then finally we have our output. And you should always have an output at the end. That'll be very important. So let's go over what should be included. Now, if you'd like to, during the exam, you can write what each one of these lines means. You won't get points taken off, and it could be clear. So I would advise for you to make it as clear as possible to whoever's grading what you're doing. So let's say that this line is going to be before iteration. So this line is sort of the setup. N equals 6, sum equals 0, count is in the loop, so we're not going to do anything. So all we're doing here is before the iteration, and there's no output before the iteration, and there's no if statements before the iteration, and we're good. So we finished this part. Now we're going to go with the inside of the loop. So loop iter1, then we're going to say n still equals 6. We're going to start going into the loop, so let's go in this line, and this whole line is going to include just the first iteration. So let's start at the top, and let's say sum equals at this point 1. So let's stick to count is 1 because it's the first iteration. It starts from 1. N mod count equals 0. That would be true because n is 6, count is 1, and 6 mod 1 is 0. There's no remainder. So this would be true. Sum equals sum plus count. Sum is 0, count is 1, so sum equals 1. And we are at this spot right here, where we finish the if statement, we are done with the loop, and we're going to come back around and do one more iteration. So I will mark this as loop iteration 2. Again, making everything as clear as I can. N is still 6. I'm going to go back to the top line. Count is now the next one, which is 2, because it increases every time in a loop. N mod count equals 6 mod 2 does not have a remainder, so that's correct. So I did this one. Then sum equals sum plus count. Sum plus count is 1 plus 2, so that would be 3. And I am done with this one. I am here again, and I come back around and loop one more time. In this case, count is going to be 3. I am going to be at the end. This is my last iteration because 6 divided by 2 is 3. So from 1, 2, 3. Remember that this is the third iteration, so loop iteration is number 3, and still equals 6. Let's go to the next line. We finished this one. Let's go to this one. N mod count, so 6 mod 3 does not have a remainder. Then we do sum plus count. Sum plus count is 6. Make it equal to sum, in this case here. And we are done with the loop. We do not go back because we finished at 3 and n divided by 2 is 3. So we are done with looping. And now we check these if statements. So our last line is final output. So we are done with the end of each iteration and doing a line for each iteration. And we're going to just put here final output because there are no more loops that we need to go into, and still equal to 6. So we don't have to worry about those. We can just say there is one check for sum n, which in this case would be does sum equal to n? Sum does equal to n, this is true. And then the output would be perfect. Now, you might ask, why don't we do these other ones over here? Why don't we do the rest of the variables? Well, you could. You could technically do n is 6, and then sum is still 6, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The count, we are out of the loop, so we should not do. The n mod count, we are out of the loop, and that is in the loop. We should not do that one. Sum equals n, we should definitely do that one. And then output, we should always do output. And at this point, we have our final trace table, and we are all done.